Back in March, the Second Court of Appeals returned its long-anticipated opinion, reversing Staley's conviction and remanding the case for a new trial, shocking many members of our community. Now, a quick walkthrough of how this appeal process works. Of course, it all starts with the trial courts, one of the hundreds of felony district courts across the state of Texas, and based on the verdict of the case, the defendant and sometimes even the prosecution can file for an appeal with one of the 12 appellate courts, or intermediate courts as they're sometimes called, where the Court of Appeals will either affirm the trial court's decision, amend it, or, as was the case with Staley, reverse the judgment and remand the case for a brand new trial. And that's when the parties are able to file a petition to the highest court in our state, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, asking them to comb through the decision from the lower court and see if they made any kind of error. And that's exactly what Wichita County DA's office is asking for in his petition that he filed at the beginning of this week. James Staley's appeal centered on an affidavit for a search warrant, which uncovered key evidence presented to a Tarrant County jury during Staley's 2-week trial in Fort Worth, with the Second Court of Appeals ultimately ruling the affidavit lacked probable cause and should have been suppressed, something Staley's defense attempted to do before the trial began. And since the evidence obtained by that search warrant was a, quote, contributing factor in the jury's deliberation, the case was reversed and remanded for a new trial. In the state's petition filed on Monday, prosecutors argued that the case law referenced by the Second Court of Appeals doesn't apply to Staley's case, arguing that probable cause depends on probabilities, not certainties. And since Wilder's death occurred inside Staley's home, it would make sense that items found in that same home could provide key evidence, since the affidavit, quote, conveys that relationships preceding a household murder were already suspicious. Prosecutors also contended that the Second Court of Appeals violated precedents set by the highest court in Texas regarding the admissibility of that evidence, asserting, quote, the court's published rationale for using the wrong standard so far departed from this court's clear recent precedent that it warrants intervention. In the state's final point, the prosecution argued that the Second Court of Appeals didn't consider the rest of the evidence presented during the trial, instead focusing solely on a GoPro video that showed Staley striking the child with full force just weeks before his death. Prosecutors contended that the remaining evidence was, quote, not merely cumulative, but overwhelming, and that the case described by the appellate court was, quote, unrecognizable from the multi-week capital murder case actually tried, ending the petition by asking the state's highest court to grant the petition, review the case, reverse the Second Court of Appeals decision, and reinstate Staley's capital murder conviction. Now, courthouse officials say the Court of Criminal Appeals could take anywhere between 1 and 6 months before we find out whether or not they'll actually review the case. Of course, we'll keep you updated with the latest information on air and on our website, Texomashomepage.com.